A chance encounter in the Windy City. The November air in Chicago carried a sharp chill, cutting through the bustling energy of Michigan Avenue. The streets were alive with shoppers, tourists, and the steady hum of traffic, all under the watchful gaze of the city's towering skyline. Among the crowd, a tall figure in a long navy blue coat, red tie, and polished black shoes walked with purpose. It was none other than Donald Trump, visiting Chicago for a high-stakes business meeting. Though his schedule was packed, he had chosen to walk the mile-long stretch back to his hotel, craving a moment to clear his mind and soak in the city's frenetic charm. As Trump strolled past Millennium Park, his thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected sight. On the corner of a busy intersection, sitting hunched against a cold brick building, was a woman. Her frail frame was wrapped in mismatched layers of tattered clothing, and her gloveless hands clutched a cardboard sign that read, "Veteran in Need. Please help." Her appearance stood in stark contrast to the glowing holiday decorations adorning the nearby shops. Trump slowed his steps, his sharp eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The woman's head was bowed, her long, graying hair hiding her face. Despite the city's festive energy, people walked by her without a second glance. It was as if she were invisible. Something about her struck him, maybe it was the sign, maybe it was her vulnerability. Whatever it was, Donald Trump stopped in his tracks. For a moment, he simply observed her, his expression unreadable. Then, against the tide of rushing pedestrians, he turned and approached her. "Ma'am," he said, his deep voice cutting through the surrounding noise. The woman looked up, startled. Her face, weathered by time and hardship, bore the unmistakable signs of exhaustion and pain. Her eyes, though weary, carried a flicker of pride and resilience. She squinted, as if trying to place the familiar face in front of her. "What's your name?" Trump asked, crouching slightly to meet her at eye level. She hesitated before answering, her voice a fragile whisper. "Teresa. Teresa Hensley." He nodded, his demeanor softening. "Teresa, I couldn't help but notice your sign. You're a veteran." "Yes, sir," she replied, clutching her jacket tighter against the cold. "Served in the army for 12 years. Got injured overseas, and, well, it's been downhill ever since." Trump studied her intently, his usual brisk energy replaced by a rare stillness. "Why are you out here? Don't you have a place to stay?" Teresa lowered her gaze, ashamed to admit the truth. "Lost my apartment months ago. Couldn't keep up with the rent after my injury. I've been trying to get back on my feet, but," she trailed off, her voice cracking. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her struggles. Trump felt a pang of guilt, not for anything he had done, but for the system that had allowed someone like Teresa, someone who had served her country, to fall through the cracks. He couldn't ignore the situation. "Not today. Teresa," he said firmly, "stay right here. We're going to fix this." Before she could respond, Trump pulled out his phone and stepped a few feet away. Passers-by slowed, their curious glances lingering on the unexpected sight of Donald Trump kneeling on a Chicago sidewalk, speaking with a homeless woman. On the other end of the call, his longtime assistant Margaret picked up instantly. "Mr. Trump, how can I help?" "Margaret," Trump said, his voice brisk, "I need you to find the nearest hotel with availability. Something top tier. And call a doctor, someone who can do a full checkup. Make sure they're ready to see someone immediately. This is urgent." "Yes, Mr. Trump," Margaret replied without hesitation. "I'll handle it right away." Trump ended the call and returned to Teresa, who was watching him with a mix of confusion and cautious hope. "Help is on the way," he told her. "But first, let's get you something warm to eat." He flagged down a nearby food vendor, purchasing a steaming cup of soup and a sandwich. Teresa accepted the meal with trembling hands, her fingers stiff from the cold. As she ate, Trump sat beside her on the sidewalk, oblivious to the stares of passing pedestrians. "What happened after you left the army?" he asked gently, his tone devoid of the sharpness he often displayed in public. Teresa hesitated, then began to share her story. She spoke of her deployments, the friends she had lost in combat, and the injury that ended her military career. She described the challenges of transitioning to civilian life, how her savings dwindled, how she struggled to find stable work, and how medical bills eventually overwhelmed her. Her voice wavered as she recounted losing her apartment and the shame of having to beg for help. "I never thought I'd end up like this," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I gave everything I had for this country. But now it feels like I've been forgotten." Trump's jaw tightened as he listened. He was no stranger to criticism, nor was he unfamiliar with stories of hardship. But hearing Teresa's struggles firsthand stirred something in him, something deeper than his usual drive to fix problems or win battles. This was personal. "You're not forgotten, Teresa," he said firmly. "Not by me, and not by this country. We're going to get you back on your feet." Minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. Margaret had worked her usual magic, coordinating everything in record time. A well-dressed driver stepped out, opening the door with a professional nod. Teresa hesitated, looking up at Trump. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Trump? You don't even know me." He knelt down once more, meeting her gaze directly. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago." With his help, Teresa climbed into the SUV. The warm interior was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside, and for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of safety. The driver handed her a soft blanket and a bottle of water, small gestures that felt monumental in the moment. Trump climbed in beside her, his presence both reassuring and determined. "We're taking you somewhere safe," he said. "And this is just the beginning." The SUV wove through the city streets, eventually pulling up to a luxury hotel downtown. The staff, prepped by Margaret, greeted them at the entrance. To Teresa's amazement, they treated her as if she were a VIP, not a homeless woman who had just been picked up off the street. A kind-faced concierge led her to a spacious suite on the top floor. Inside, she found a plush bed, a warm shower, and a set of clean clothes waiting for her. A doctor arrived shortly after, conducting a thorough examination and prescribing medicine to address her immediate ailments. Meanwhile, Trump remained nearby, ensuring every detail was handled smoothly. He spoke quietly with the hotel manager, arranging for Teresa to stay as long as necessary. He also made a few more phone calls, his mind already racing with ideas for how to help her long-term. For the first time in years, Teresa felt seen, not as a statistic or a problem to be ignored, but as a person deserving of dignity and care. And as she settled into the warmth of her new surroundings, she couldn't help but wonder if this chance encounter might be the start of something life-changing. The first step toward hope. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the Chicago skyline the next morning, Teresa Hensley woke in a state of disbelief. The soft bed beneath her felt like a distant memory, the plush comforter wrapped around her a far cry from the cold concrete she'd been sleeping on just a day earlier. For a moment, she lay still, her fingers grazing the fabric of the pillowcase, half wondering if it was all a dream. The quiet knock at the door broke her thoughts. "Miss Hensley," a warm voice called out. "It's Dr. Levin. May I come in?" Teresa quickly sat up, smoothing her hair self-consciously. "Yes, come in," she replied, her voice still hoarse from the cold she had endured on the streets. Dr. Levin, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, entered the suite carrying a small medical bag. "Good morning," he said with a reassuring smile. "I'm here to check on you. Mr. Trump asked me to ensure you're feeling better." The mention of Trump brought it all rushing back. The previous day's events, the unexpected kindness, the warm meal, the luxurious suite, felt surreal. Teresa nodded and allowed Dr. Levin to take her vitals. As he worked, he chatted casually, asking about her time in the army and her current health challenges. "You're dehydrated," he said after finishing the exam. "And your blood pressure is a bit low, but nothing we can't address. I'm going to prescribe some vitamins and a few medications to help with your joints and the cough you've been nursing. With some proper nutrition and rest, you'll feel like yourself again." Teresa nodded, her gratitude unspoken but evident in her teary eyes. "Thank you, doctor. And, please thank Mr. Trump for me. I don't know why he's helping me, but I'm grateful." Dr. Levin smiled as he packed up his bag. "You can thank him yourself. I believe he's waiting downstairs." Down in the hotel's elegant lounge, Donald Trump sat at a corner table, reviewing papers with his assistant Margaret. Despite the busy morning, his demeanor was relaxed, his presence commanding as always. He looked up as Teresa approached, her hesitant steps betraying her lingering disbelief. "Teresa." Trump greeted, standing and motioning for her to sit. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better," she said, her voice steady but emotional. I don't even know how to thank you for everything you've done. No one's ever gone out of their way for me like this." Trump waved off her gratitude with a casual hand. "You don't need to thank me. I told you yesterday, this isn't just about you. It's about fixing what should have never been broken." Margaret leaned forward, her tablet in hand. "Mr. Trump has already been making arrangements to help you get back on your feet. But first, we need to understand your situation a little better. If you're comfortable, could you tell us more about what led to where you are now?" Teresa hesitated, the shame of her circumstances weighing heavily on her. But the kindness in Margaret's eyes and Trump's genuine attention gave her the courage to speak. "I enlisted in the army when I was 19, she began. "It was my way of escaping a rough home life and doing something meaningful. I served for 12 years, 2 tours overseas. I was injured during my second deployment, a roadside bomb. It left me with a bad back and nerve damage in my legs. The VA helped with the immediate care, but..." She trailed off, struggling to find the words. Trump leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "But what, Teresa? They don't do enough," she said, her voice breaking. "I couldn't keep up with the medical bills, and the disability payments barely covered my rent. I lost my job because of my injuries, and once my savings ran out, that was it. I ended up on the streets." Her story hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her struggles. Trump clenched his fists, his expression hardening. "It's unacceptable," he said, his voice low but firm. "No one who served this country should be abandoned like this." Teresa looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. "I tried to get help. I went to shelters, applied for assistance, but the waiting lists were endless, and the resources were stretched thin. I didn't want to be a burden, so I stopped asking." Trump sat back, his mind racing. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. "Teresa," he said, his tone resolute, "we're not just going to fix this for you. We're going to fix this for every veteran who's been left behind. But first, let's focus on you." Margaret nodded, taking notes on her tablet. "We've already contacted a non-profit organization that works specifically with homeless veterans. They'll help you secure permanent housing and provide support for job training and therapy." Teresa blinked, her eyes wide with disbelief. You've already done that?" Trump smiled faintly. "You'll learn quickly, Teresa, I don't waste time." Margaret continued, "In the meantime, Mr. Trump has arranged for you to stay here at the hotel. The staff has been instructed to make sure you have everything you need, and we've set up appointments with a physical therapist to help with your back." Teresa's hands flew to her mouth, overwhelmed by the generosity. I don't know what to say." Trump placed a hand on the table, his voice softening. "You don't have to say anything. Just focus on getting better. And when you're ready, we'll talk about what's next." Over the next few days, Teresa settled into a routine that felt almost unreal. Each morning began with a visit from the physical therapist, who guided her through gentle exercises to alleviate her pain. The hotel's chef prepared nutritious meals tailored to her recovery, and the staff treated her with a respect and kindness she hadn't experienced in years. But it wasn't just the physical comforts that began to heal Teresa, it was the sense of purpose Trump instilled in her. Every evening, he would stop by to check on her progress, asking about her therapy and discussing her plans for the future. One evening, as they sat in the lounge, Trump brought up the idea of work. "What did you do before the army?" he asked. "I was studying to be a teacher," Teresa said, a faint smile crossing her face. "I've always loved working with kids, but that dream feels so far away now." Trump shook his head. "Dreams don't disappear, Teresa. They just get put on hold. If teaching is what you want to do, we'll find a way to make it happen." Her smile grew, the flicker of hope in her eyes now a steady glow. "You really believe I can get back to that?" "I don't just believe it, I know it," Trump said firmly. "And I'll make sure you have the tools and support to get there." That night, as Teresa lay in bed, she reflected on the whirlwind of changes that had come into her life. For the first time in years, she felt not just safe but empowered. Donald Trump's intervention had been more than an act of kindness, it had been a lifeline. And as she drifted to sleep, she realized that her journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming her life, her dreams, and her dignity. Little did she know, Trump's plans for her, and for veterans like her, were only just beginning. The road to recovery. The next few weeks in the luxurious suite were nothing short of transformative for Teresa Hensley. The once shattered woman who had sat hunched in the cold, cardboard sign in hand, was now beginning to rebuild herself, piece by piece. Each day brought a new sense of purpose, a quiet but steady shift from survival to hope. The combination of physical therapy, mental health support, and the unwavering kindness of Donald Trump and his team had begun to work wonders. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she might truly have a future again. Every morning, she awoke to the soft light filtering through the windows of the suite, illuminating the expansive cityscape. It wasn't the same cold, dark street corner she'd grown used to, it wasn't the crackling of homeless fires or the bustling crowds who passed her by without a second glance. Instead, she was greeted with the sound of a freshly brewed coffee and the sight of a freshly made bed, a luxury she had once longed for. But it wasn't just the comforts that had changed her world, it was the way people were treating her. No longer was she just the woman holding the sign, no longer was she someone who had been forgotten. The staff at the hotel treated her with the respect of a queen, their care and kindness making her feel human again. The concierge, the chefs, even the security guards, they all greeted her like a guest, not a charity case. It was a new experience for Teresa, one she had never imagined could exist for someone like her. The physical therapist, Dr. Emmeline Gwynn, visited every morning, gently guiding Teresa through exercises that slowly began to strengthen her back and legs. The pain, which had been a constant companion for so long, was gradually easing. "We're making great progress," Dr. Nguyen would say, her upbeat attitude contagious. "With a little more work, I think you'll be able to stand taller than you have in years." Teresa's response was always a small, weary smile. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this good. The exercises weren't easy, but they were necessary, and with each day, she was seeing results. For the first time in a long while, she felt her body responding to the care she was finally receiving, the kind of care she had once dreamed of but never thought possible. One afternoon, as Teresa sat by the window of her suite, watching the world go by, she felt a tap on the door. It was Margaret, Trump's assistant, with a familiar, warm smile. "Mr. Trump would like to see you," she said, her tone both respectful and friendly. "He's been asking about you, and I think you're ready for the next step." Teresa's heart skipped a beat. It was a little more than a month ago that she had been sitting on the cold pavement, with no hope in sight. Now, here she was, being invited to meet the man who had changed her life. She was nervous, not sure what to expect, but her newfound sense of self-worth made her determined to face whatever was next. Trump's office was nothing like she expected, comfortable, relaxed, and surprisingly warm. There were no lavish displays of wealth or grandeur. Instead, it was a simple, organized space with large windows that offered a view of the city skyline. Trump was seated at a desk, his coat draped over the back of a chair, but he was far from the intimidating figure she had seen on TV. He looked up with a smile as she entered. "Teresa," he greeted, standing up and extending his hand. "Good to see you. I trust everything's going well." Yes, it's going well, Mr. Trump," Teresa replied, a slight tremor in her voice. "Better than I could have ever imagined." Trump nodded, gesturing for her to sit across from him. "I'm glad to hear that. You've made remarkable progress, and I want to keep it going. I think it's time we take some more concrete steps forward." Teresa felt a surge of curiosity, mixed with a touch of trepidation. "What do you mean?" Trump leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I want to help you get back on your feet, Teresa. I know you've talked about wanting to return to teaching. I've already reached out to a few organizations that specialize in helping veterans get back into the workforce. But you don't need to rush. What I'm offering is time. Time to heal, time to grow, and time to figure out what comes next. You've given a lot of yourself in the past, and it's time you get something back." Tears welled up in Teresa's eyes, but she fought them back. She wasn't sure how to process his words. It was one thing to be helped off the streets, to be given a warm meal and a bed to sleep in. But this? This was something else. Trump was offering her more than just physical comfort, he was offering her the chance to rebuild her life. "I don't know what to say," Teresa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought anyone would give me a chance again. I thought I was done." Trump smiled gently. "You're not done, Teresa. You've only just begun." In the days that followed, Teresa found herself settling into a new routine. She continued with her therapy, but now there was a renewed sense of purpose behind every movement. Each exercise wasn't just about alleviating pain, it was about reclaiming her strength. She began to feel her body growing stronger, her resolve growing firmer. The physical progress was remarkable, but it was the mental transformation that was most striking. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building. Trump, true to his word, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He connected her with a network of veterans organizations that provided job training, housing assistance, and even mentorship. One of the first calls he made was to a veteran advocacy group that offered educational scholarships and grants for veterans looking to retrain and re-enter the workforce. Within days, Teresa had a full scholarship to attend a program that would help her transition back into teaching, the career she had always dreamed of. "I never thought I could go back to it," Teresa confessed to Margaret one afternoon, as she sat at a desk in the hotel suite reviewing course materials. "But now, it feels like something I can do again. Like it's within my reach." Margaret smiled, her eyes warm with approval. "You've always had it in you, Teresa. Sometimes, all it takes is someone believing in you. And you've got a whole team behind you now." The weeks that followed were filled with progress, each day a little brighter than the last. Teresa attended classes for her teaching certification, and as she immersed herself in her studies, she found that her passion for education was reignited. She devoured every textbook, every lesson, and for the first time in years, she felt alive with purpose. Donald Trump, ever the busy businessman, checked in regularly. Whether through phone calls or brief visits, he made it clear that he had a vested interest in her recovery, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. He became a sounding board, someone she could turn to when she was unsure about her next step. "You're doing great, Teresa," Trump said one afternoon as they sat in the lounge at the hotel, sipping coffee. "But remember, you don't have to do it alone. I'm still here, every step of the way." As Teresa sat there, the weight of everything she had experienced began to sink in. She wasn't just grateful for the roof over her head or the meals on the table. She was grateful for the opportunity to reclaim her dignity. No longer was she a nameless face on the streets, hidden in the shadows. She was Teresa Hensley, a woman with a future, a veteran who had earned her place in this world, and someone who had been given a second chance. And as she looked across at Donald Trump, she realized something even more important: he had given her more than help. He had given her belief in herself again. A future reclaimed. As the days turned into weeks, Teresa Hensley's life began to shift in ways she hadn't believed possible. The warmth of the luxury hotel suite, once a symbol of an unfamiliar world, now felt like a temporary foundation for a lasting change. Teresa wasn't just getting back on her feet, she was reclaiming parts of herself that she had long buried in the rubble of her past. Her mornings began with physical therapy sessions that now felt less like grueling exercises and more like a steady progression towards a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine in years. Dr. Emmeline Gwynn, the physical therapist who had worked with Teresa from the start, was astounded at the rate of improvement. "You've come a long way," Dr. Nguyen remarked one morning as Teresa completed a series of stretches with more fluidity than before. "I can see it in the way you move. And your posture has improved. This is what consistent care looks like." Teresa smiled faintly. "I feel stronger, but it's still hard to believe this is happening. Some days, I still feel like I'm waiting for it all to fall apart again." Dr. Nguyen paused, looking directly into Teresa's eyes. "The fear of failure is something we all carry. But you're not failing, Teresa. You're healing." For the first time in a long while, Teresa took those words to heart. She had come to trust Dr. Nguyen, who had encouraged her not only in physical recovery but also in rebuilding her confidence. Every day, Teresa felt the growing strength in her body mirrored by a quieter, stronger sense of self-belief. Meanwhile, Donald Trump had continued to stay actively involved, not just in her rehabilitation but in ensuring that Teresa's future was secure. He had connected her with multiple veteran advocacy organizations and ensured she had a support system that extended beyond the walls of the hotel. He understood that physical recovery was only one part of her journey. What truly mattered was her reintegration into society, her sense of purpose. "Teresa," Trump said one afternoon as he sat across from her in the lounge, "I've been speaking with some contacts in the education field. I want to make sure you don't just get by, but that you thrive." Teresa looked at him, surprised. "You've really thought of everything, haven't you?" Trump gave a wry smile. "I don't do things halfway. You've got the opportunity to not only teach but to lead. And we're going to make sure you have all the resources you need to succeed." "I don't know what to say," Teresa responded, her voice catching. "I never thought I'd be in a position where I had opportunities again. I felt invisible, forgotten." "You're not invisible, Teresa," Trump said, his tone serious. "You've served your country, and now it's time for this country to take care of you." By the time she had fully recovered from the physical toll her years on the streets had taken, Teresa's life had begun to reshape itself around the promise of new beginnings. With Trump's help, she enrolled in a program that would allow her to obtain her teaching certification. For the first time in years, she felt like she was working towards something meaningful, a career that would give her both stability and purpose. It wasn't easy. The coursework was rigorous, and she had to balance it with ongoing physical therapy sessions and doctor's appointments. Yet, every time Teresa felt overwhelmed, she remembered why she had started this journey, to reclaim the dreams she had once lost to injury and hardship. One night, after a particularly long day of studying and therapy, Teresa sat in the hotel lounge, her textbook spread out before her. She had a cup of coffee in her hand, but her mind wasn't on the pages. Instead, she thought about the future, about how far she had come and how much further she could go. She heard the soft clicking of shoes on the marble floor and looked up to see Margaret approaching. The ever-efficient assistant smiled warmly as she sat across from Teresa. "I've been meaning to catch up with you," she said. "How are things going with the program?" "Good," Teresa replied, setting her coffee down. "It's tough, but it feels good to be doing something again. Some days I wonder if I'm really capable of going back to teaching. But then I remind myself that I'm not doing it alone." Margaret nodded. Exactly. And I think Mr. Trump would be the first to tell you that you've already proven you're more than capable. You've come so far, Teresa. Teresa smiled softly. I know. It's just hard to believe sometimes. It feels like one moment I'm begging for change, and the next, it's happening. That's the power of persistence, Margaret replied. You've earned this. As the months passed, Teresa's confidence began to blossom. She attended classes, studied relentlessly, and gradually began preparing for the next chapter of her life. She also began to rebuild her social life, reconnecting with old friends and even forming new relationships with other veterans she had met through Trump's connections. There was a sense of camaraderie that she hadn't realized she'd been missing for so long. But the most profound change wasn't the recovery of her physical strength or even the promise of a new career. The most profound change was in how Teresa began to see herself. The woman who had once felt abandoned by society, who had spent months on the streets with nothing more than a cardboard sign and the remnants of her military service, was now standing tall, both physically and mentally. She wasn't just a veteran. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a woman with a future. One evening, Trump invited Teresa to his office for a brief meeting. She walked in, her posture straight, her demeanor confident. Trump stood when she entered, giving her an approving nod. You look different, Teresa, he said. Stronger, happier. I feel different, she replied, a genuine smile tugging at her lips. I've been so focused on getting through the next day that I never stopped to think about the future. But now, I know it's within reach. Thanks to you. Trump chuckled, leaning back in his chair. It's not just me. It's you. You did the work. You earned this. Teresa's smile faded slightly as she grew more serious. I still think about the others. The ones who didn't get this chance. The ones who don't have anyone. Trump's expression softened, his gaze intense. That's why I'm involved in helping veterans like you, Teresa. You're not just here to rebuild your own life. You're here to inspire change for everyone who's been forgotten. That night, Teresa lay awake, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. She thought about the other veterans she had met, those still struggling on the streets, those with no advocates, no help. And she thought about what she could do, how she could use her experiences to reach them. The journey she had started, the one that had taken her from the streets of Chicago to this moment of hope and possible. New beginnings. It was early spring in Chicago when Teresa Hensley took her first steps out of the hotel suite that had been her refuge for the past several months. The city was alive with the quiet hum of change, the streets lined with budding trees, the smell of fresh rain mingling with the scent of blooming flowers. Teresa took a deep breath, her body stronger than it had been in years, her spirit even stronger. She was no longer the woman who sat on the corner of Michigan Avenue with a cardboard sign, she was a woman who had rediscovered her strength, her purpose, and her future. Trump's assistance had given her not only the physical healing she so desperately needed, but also the tools to rebuild her life. The scholarship to continue her education, the networking opportunities, and the mental health support had all come together to form the foundation of a new chapter. But it was the confidence she had gained, the belief that her life still had meaning, that had made the most significant difference. Today was special. Teresa had completed the last of her coursework and was preparing to meet with the admissions committee at a local university to discuss her enrollment in their teaching program. For the first time in years, she felt like she could stand on her own. Her dream of becoming a teacher was no longer an abstract hope, it was a tangible goal, within her reach. As she stood in front of the full-length mirror in her new apartment, she adjusted the collar of her blouse, admiring the woman she had become. She still had a long way to go, but the journey she had started felt real now, not just a pipe dream. The reflection in the mirror no longer mirrored the fragility of the woman who had once hidden from life's difficulties. Instead, she saw someone who was ready to meet the future, head-on, with no fear. Later that morning, Teresa arrived at the university campus, her nerves tingling with both excitement and anxiety. The campus was beautiful, with sprawling green lawns, impressive brick buildings, and the unmistakable buzz of students moving between classes. As she walked toward the administrative building, her heart beat a little faster. This was a world she hadn't expected to be part of just months ago. Inside the office, she was greeted warmly by the admissions counselor, a woman in her late 30s with short black hair and glasses. Teresa introduced herself, trying to calm her racing pulse. "Welcome, Teresa," the counselor said with a smile. "I'm glad you're here today. You've made such incredible progress, and I'm excited to discuss how we can help you move forward." Teresa nodded, her voice catching slightly as she spoke. "Thank you. I've worked really hard to get to this point, and I know I'm ready to make the most of this opportunity." As the counselor reviewed her application, Teresa couldn't help but notice the warmth in her eyes, the genuine interest as she asked about Teresa's life. They discussed her experiences in the army, her injury, and her transition to civilian life. Each question Teresa answered felt like another step toward reclaiming the life she had once lost. But it was the counselor's next question that truly caught Teresa's attention. "Have you thought about how you want to focus your studies?" she asked, flipping through the pages in front of her. "What subjects are you passionate about teaching?" Teresa paused, considering. "I've always been drawn to history and social studies. I want to teach kids about the world, to show them the value of understanding history and the lessons it holds. I want them to see the world beyond their immediate surroundings, the way I never had the chance to as a kid." The counselor smiled broadly. "I think you'd be an incredible asset to our program. Your perspective is unique, and you clearly have the drive to make a difference. We're excited to offer you a spot in the program." Teresa's heart soared. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. This wasn't just a moment of academic success, it was a moment of redemption. Her dreams were no longer confined to distant hopes, they were unfolding right in front of her. "Thank you," Teresa whispered, almost overwhelmed with emotion. "I promise I won't let you down." As she left the office, her steps felt lighter, as though the weight of the years she had spent wandering had finally been lifted. She had a place now, not just in the university, but in the world she had once believed would never welcome her. The future she had so longed for was finally within her grasp. Over the next few weeks, Teresa settled into a new routine. Her classes were challenging, but each day felt like a new opportunity to prove herself. She found herself immersed in lessons on history, teaching methodologies, and the power of education to transform lives. Every assignment she completed, every paper she wrote, felt like another brick in the foundation she was building for her future. Despite the academic challenges, Teresa found the transition to student life invigorating. She began to form connections with her classmates, many of whom were younger and more accustomed to the world of academia, but they were welcoming and eager to learn from her unique experiences. Teresa's life, once a series of disconnected fragments, was now a cohesive story, one of struggle, perseverance, and eventual triumph. One afternoon, as Teresa sat in the university's library, studying for an upcoming exam, she was approached by a familiar face. It was Margaret, Trump's assistant, who had become a trusted mentor during Teresa's recovery. "Teresa, how are you?" Margaret asked warmly as she slid into the seat across from her. "I'm good," Teresa replied, looking up from her textbooks with a smile. "Busy, but good. Classes are intense, but I'm keeping up." "That's what I like to hear," Margaret said with a grin. "I wanted to check in on you and see how everything's going. You've made incredible progress, but I also know how challenging it can be to balance everything." Teresa nodded, grateful for Margaret's continued support. "It's a lot, but it's worth it. I know this is what I'm meant to do. I just hope I can continue to keep up with everything." Margaret's smile softened. "You're doing great. And you're not alone in this. Remember, you've got people who believe in you." As Teresa continued her journey toward becoming a teacher, she began to see herself in a new light. The woman who had once struggled to find her place in the world was now actively shaping a future defined by purpose, compassion, and strength. It was hard to imagine just how far she had come, from the streets of Chicago to the halls of a prestigious university, from the depths of despair to the edge of a new life. Her story wasn't just about overcoming personal obstacles, it was about inspiring change, not just in herself, but in others. She wasn't just going to be a teacher, she was going to be a mentor, a guide for the students who needed her most, just as she had needed help all those months ago. And as Teresa sat in that library, surrounded by textbooks and dreams, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. It wasn't just for the help she had received, but for the strength she had found within herself. She was no longer the woman on the corner asking for change, she was the woman with the power to create change. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, smiling when she saw the name on the screen, Trump. She answered, feeling a warmth in her chest at the thought of how far she had come. "Teresa, it's Mr. Trump," his voice came through the speaker, as confident and direct as always. "I'm doing great," Teresa replied, her voice steady and full of gratitude. "Classes are tough, but I'm keeping up. I wanted to thank you again for everything." Trump's voice softened, just slightly. "You've earned it, Teresa. I have no doubt you're going to make a big impact in the world." As she ended the call and placed the phone back in her pocket, Teresa looked out the window of the library. The city below was vast and full of possibilities, but for the first time, it felt like it was within her reach. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. And she was ready for whatever came next. A legacy of transformation. Months passed, and Teresa Hensley's life continued to evolve in ways she never imagined. The past year, which had once been marred by hardship and struggle, now stood as a testament to her resilience and determination. Every step forward, whether small or large, was a triumph, proof that the human spirit could endure even the most crushing setbacks. Yet, despite all the changes, Teresa knew her journey was far from over. She had already achieved so much, but now, with her teaching degree nearing completion and a life that was beginning to truly reflect her potential, she was ready to turn her focus outward. No longer just a woman recovering from homelessness and physical injury, she was becoming a beacon for others, a symbol of hope for those who had been overlooked or forgotten, just as she had once been. One bright morning, Teresa stood before a classroom of eager young students. The walls were decorated with colorful posters and motivational quotes, the desks arranged in neat rows, and the air hummed with the anticipation of the day's lesson. Teresa had spent the past few months preparing for this moment, her first day as a teacher. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice ringing with warmth and authority. The students, a mix of different ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds, looked at her expectantly. Teresa stood tall at the front of the classroom, a vision of calm confidence. She no longer felt like an imposter, this was where she belonged. "Today," she continued, "we're going to explore the past, but more importantly, we're going to talk about how it shapes our future. History isn't just about dates and facts, it's about understanding who we are, where we come from, and where we want to go." As she spoke, the students seemed to lean in, captivated not just by her words, but by the sincerity that radiated from her. She understood what it meant to struggle, to rise from the ashes, and to make something meaningful out of a broken past. That authenticity was contagious. As the lesson continued, Teresa moved from student to student, offering help with assignments, engaging them in discussion, and encouraging them to think critically. She recognized the looks of uncertainty in some of their eyes, the same uncertainty she had once felt in her own life. But this time, Teresa was in control. She knew what it took to fight through doubt and come out stronger. That afternoon, after class, Teresa found herself reflecting on how far she had come. The echoes of her past were still there, faint reminders of the struggles she had faced. But they no longer defined her. They had become the foundation of her strength, not a barrier to her success. In the teacher's lounge, she was approached by one of her colleagues, Ms. Evelyn Simmons, a seasoned educator with years of experience. Ms. Simmons had heard about Teresa's background and the incredible journey she had taken to get to this point. She smiled warmly as she sat down beside Teresa. "You're doing incredible work, Teresa," Ms. Simmons said. "The students really respond to you. It's clear that you've been through a lot, and I think they can feel that. You bring something to this classroom that I can't quite put my finger on, but it's special." Teresa smiled, her cheeks flushing slightly at the compliment. "Thank you, Ms. Simmons. I just try to be honest with them. I want them to know that no matter where they come from, they have the power to shape their future. I didn't believe that about myself for a long time, but now I know it's true." Ms. Simmons nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you've made believers out of all of us. Keep doing what you're doing, you're changing lives." As Teresa drove home that evening, the setting sun casting an orange glow over the city, she reflected on the journey that had led her to this moment. She had never imagined, when she was on the streets of Chicago, that she would one day be standing in front of a classroom, imparting knowledge to the next generation. She had never thought she could escape the cycle of poverty, homelessness, and injury. Yet, here she was, a teacher, a mentor, a force for good. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Margaret, Trump's assistant, who had remained a steady presence in her life. Teresa opened the message and read the words that brought a smile to her face. "Mr. Trump would like to meet with you tomorrow. He has an idea he wants to discuss." Curiosity piqued, Teresa made a mental note to meet with Trump the next day. She wasn't sure what he had in mind, but she knew that his involvement in her journey hadn't just been about her recovery, it had been about something larger, something that would impact others. The change she had experienced was a ripple in a larger movement, and she was ready to see where it would take her next. The following morning, Teresa walked into a quiet cafe where she was to meet Trump. The air was calm, the only sound being the soft clinking of coffee cups and the hum of conversation. Trump was already seated at a table, his usual confidence apparent as he looked up from the papers in front of him. "Teresa, good to see you," he said with a smile, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please, sit down." Teresa took a seat, the warm light from the window casting a glow on the table. "Mr. Trump, thank you for meeting with me. I've been so busy with teaching, I almost forgot about our appointment." "No need to thank me," Trump said with a chuckle. "I've been following your progress closely, and I have to say, I'm very impressed. You've come a long way, Teresa. But I also know that you have the potential to do even more. You've proven that you can rise above adversity, but now it's time for you to help others do the same." Teresa raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Trump leaned forward slightly, his tone more serious now. "I want to help you start a program for homeless veterans. You've lived that life, you know the struggles, the resources that are needed, and most importantly, you understand the importance of giving people a second chance. Together, we can create something that will not only give veterans the support they need but also help them rediscover their purpose in life."